So what I want to try to do in this video is to just explain a few of the elements associated, first of all, with Model 1. In Model 1, you have certainly the unit of analysis, which is the nation state, and that typically it is the head of the government who is the individual identifying what are the values of the nation state and how do they calculate the various options for policy and how they choose the one that they feel maximizes the values of the country. So first of all, you're assuming that there is an identifiable national interest and that this individual, in our case the president, can identify the national interest, that they are the person best situated to say here are the primary values of the country. And if you look at the evidence across the options, always there's so much uncertainty in the evidence that there is room for disagreement, obviously. But this is seen as an evidence-based model, that they are trying to maximize the values for the country. In the end, then, he goes on to talk about organizing concepts that reinforce this. And a lot of the scholars who are described here are scholars you probably read in international relations. When we talk about neorealism today, certainly this is a model that's closely associated with Model 1. I think that game theory certainly is another thing that you usually would see in international relations, and a lot of that literature is incorporated into this chapter. So you're trying to make value maximizing choices to advance the values of the country. Other things that we ought to consider here, I think that if you've ever looked at, say, the rational comprehensive model, which we did in public administration, you also see this process of trying to identify what is the evidence, what is the nature of the problem you're facing, what are the various alternatives that you could choose to respond to the problem, what is the evidence for each of those, and then making the choice that is the most advantageous for the country. The dominant inference pattern then is that you should be able to observe in the probably rhetoric of the leader of the country some of their consideration of the evidence and the values. Obviously, when the action plays out, you also get to see what their choice was. Following this notion of the dominant inference pattern, which is where you're looking for these behaviors that are consistent with those organizing concepts that they laid out, he offers several examples typically in these areas, and so you want to look for that. And again, it is the president in our country who is the primary actor that you would be looking for. At the end of this list of elements of each model, he talks about the evidence or the methodology that is used to make the choice. And here you have a consideration of alternatives, which we have described. And he uses this term vicarious problem solving. And the vicarious problem solving is really referencing the president being able to engage in vicarious thinking about what would be in the best interest of the country. But I thought that's an interesting term, and it's not one that I have seen used a lot of other places. So some of the people you would expect to read here, certainly from whether you were reading the first or the second edition, you would have found Morgenthau, one of the key scholars, the best, most read book in international relations in graduate school. Certainly you also see Keohane, who is a more contemporary thinker on much more associated with issues of trade. And then you have Kissinger referenced some in here. So you have a lot of scholars that you've probably read. And one of my favorites that gets discussed a lot here is Schelling. So hopefully this helps you understand Model 1.